Okay, hello. This is MB speaking. I am going to record some interview questions for your script of SHIJIN Q&A. We'll see how we go. Hello everyone, and welcome to the ECLIPSE Sound Team Q&A for SHIJIN, their latest album. I'm MB, a friend of its members and fellow composer. I frequently collaborate with them as part of Resonant Union. But today I am here as their interviewer. Hello Arvin, Alki, Philip.
Wellum.
Hello.
Hello.
So the reason I'm here today is because fans had lots of questions about SHIJIN and your vision for the album as a whole. So now that it's out, can you tell us how you're feeling?
Recency bias and vanity aside, it's easily one of my favorite albums I've ever listened to. I tend to suffer from imposter syndrome due to my lack of experience and background, but in spite of that, I think this is about as cohesive as it's gonna get.
To me, SHIJIN is a major achievement for all three of us. It's the culmination of everything we learned about music making, and it feels like it has a kind of maturity that our previous albums just don't have. I'm really happy with how well everything in it turned out.
We've worked on this project for 2 years. As soon as we finished Michi, we knew we wanted to make an action RPG-inspired album as our next big project. I'm so proud of how far we've come in just those 2 years alone. I think SHIJIN is a testament to our dedication to the craft and our flexibility and synergy as a team.
Wow, honestly, that's really inspiring to hear. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, on to the first section of this interview, which will be questions about the album itself. One fan asked, "Why is it so good?"
Hello and fun. Thanks.
Alright, thank you so much for coming to this interview. It's been a pleasure being the interviewer for... No, I'm joking. Let's get to the serious questions. SHIJIN seems to have an abstract story that's told through the music. One fan asks, was the story drafted before producing the music?
No, we started writing with pretty much nothing in mind aside from the SHIJIN concept itself. However, we always draft the tracklist very early on. We decide how many boss themes, how many field themes, how many dungeon themes, how many cutscene themes we need throughout the album, and generally stick to that structure unless major changes occur. Arvin will talk about that in a minute. That said, in March 2024, after we composed about 2/3 of the album, I created the map, and that helped us to finish the rest of the album and make it cohesive.
Is the story left for personal interpretation, like in Michi?
The only canon in SHIJIN is its concept itself, the music, the art, and the track names. Everything else, well, is up to your imagination. We always stay vague enough that it will never restrict people's creative freedom around our albums.
That's very insightful. Speaking of track names, another question reads, how do you go about naming the tracks?
It's a round table, or a triangle table. Technically a square table now that Miss Momiyama has joined us. But yeah, we all pitch in when brainstorming for track names. Normally, the writer will have something in mind that they want to convey with the title. If we think it's spot on, we'll leave it as is. But if they're open to more ideas, we'll pass it back and forth until we find the perfect title. For this album, we eventually landed on using single word titles for all the boss themes except for the final boss.
It's great to hear how you all pitch in on that. Now, the album has 23 tracks. Was this number planned from the start?
Like with Michi, we originally planned to write 21 songs for SHIJIN. Mystic Ruins was originally going to replace one of our songs. However, I suggested including her songs in addition to the original 21, just so we could flesh out the album a little bit better. That's when I also requested that she write Fang Sunken in Stone so that all 4 composers would have a dedicated shrine theme. I think we made room for what eventually turned into Arboreal Ardor and Origin. It's hard to say because we reiterated the track list several times before we landed on the final ordering. We had a set number of area, battle, and event themes, but as the narrative began to take shape, we adjusted the ordering and added new songs where necessary.
The endless struggle. But it begs the question, were any tracks cut from the album?
A lot. On my part, at least. I wrote 3 scrapped variations of the Arctic Leviathan's Hollow before I landed on the final version. A track I'm sure the community will find interesting was the origin behind the ostinato used throughout SHIJIN, the track, and the album at large. The intro with the piano part at the start, that came from a work in progress I wrote before I started composing in FL Studio, so back in 2020 even. Additionally, we each arranged a version of Void of Basilica as well. It was the first piece I wrote for the project, and both Arvin and Aoki took interest in arranging it. Someday you may hear our versions as well.
Amazing. Now, if a game based on SHIJIN were to be made, what would you like it to be?
I'd want it to be fast-paced and fun, just like the old Ys Arc Engine games.
People who know me know that I love Souls games. Well, in my mind, SHIJIN would play a bit like Elden Ring without the size and look similar to older Ys games. A challenging, top-down, open-world action RPG. What a mouthful. Well, it's a bit like the first Zelda in a sense. The combat would be methodical but fast-paced. The exploration would be meaningful at all times without much running around, because I hate that in modern open-world games. And there are lots of other things I could talk about because I have lots of ideas, but that's something for another time.
I think I'd go in the opposite direction of Alki. No open world, very defined areas with natural progression until an open split for tackling the Guardian Shrines in whichever order the player wants. I agree with Arvin's take on the Ys Arc Engine games. I think Arc of Nipishtim especially has a lot of interesting ideas that a potential game based on SHIJIN could utilize and refine to a modern experience. Some puzzle elements here, fast-paced combat and combos there, and you have a recipe for a great time.
Thanks for sharing all of that. People also asked about the collaborative tracks on the album. Was it your plan from the start to work together on some of the tracks?
For the most part, no. That happened as we wrote the pieces. In simpler cases, we wanted to use Alki's Chinese instruments and asked him to program the parts. In the case of Voided Basilica, Arvin first arranged my work in progress, and then Alki arranged the full piece when I had finished it. As I was the last one to finish my pieces, I prioritized writing the rest over learning how to program a guitar, something that I guarantee you'll see on our next project. With Natural Phoenix Ludus, Arvin and I agreed from the time I started writing the piece that he would arrange the rock elements I wrote. That way you get the best of both worlds.
What was the process behind making these tracks?
In the cases of programming, we finished each song and then sent out MIDIs for the parts we needed. For Origin, I had MIDIs for everyone, including Miss Momiyama, to use their original instruments from the shrine themes at the end of the boss theme. For Voided Basilica, I sent out a MIDI for the full file. For Natural Phoenix Ludus, Arvin and I went back and forth on the mixing after I finished the track until we found something we were happy with.
The reason I programmed all the Chinese instruments is because I bought an entire bundle of them just for SHIJIN. That was an expensive yet important purchase that I wanted to make in order to improve the overall value of the album. And after I learned how to program them, I started implementing them in my songs, and eventually I helped Arvin and Phil to do the same. They would send me the melody and then I would program it using my instruments.
Fascinating. I'd like to talk a bit more about Momiyama-san's involvement with the album. Could you tell us a little bit about how she became an official member of ECLIPSE Sound Team?
I'd spoken to Momiyama a few times in the past prior to SHIJIN, so we were already on good terms with each other. I asked her back in 2022 if she'd be willing to take a commission and contribute a song to an album ECLIPSE was working on in a distant future, to which she happily agreed. She was originally going to be a guest composer only, but as we ramped up towards release, we found ourselves needing to communicate with her more often for minor revisions, as well as having her program some MIDI data for Origin, as Philip mentioned earlier. With how responsive she was and how willing she was to work with us, and with about a month left before release, I suggested to the guys that we should try to get her on board as our fourth member. Once they both agreed, I sent her the invitation along with the details as to what it would entail, to which she happily accepted.
She also ended up translating the tracklist to Japanese. How did that come about?
Aoki already had a base translation for the album, probably through DeepL or something. I didn't actually ask him how he did it. But given that we had a native Japanese speaker on the album now, we requested that she translate the track list. It was largely a painless process, with a couple of hiccups due to difficult words, like what the hell is a voided basilica? Anyway, we were able to work through any discrepancies and problems with ease.
Now we've got a few questions addressed to Momiyama-san. Do you have any general comments or thoughts about having joined ECLIPSE Sound Team?
So I'm obviously not Momiyama, so just pretend I'm a Japanese woman when I answer these. I was excited to receive an invitation to work on this project and to join ECLIPSE, but I was also worried about being able to meet their expectations. I took a long break after my maternity leave, so I struggled a bit, but thanks to everyone's encouragement, I was able to write songs I felt satisfied with. When I listened to the full album, I felt that my songs were cohesive with everyone else's, which made me feel relieved. I'm happy to have participated in this project.
What are your favorite songs from SHIJIN?
It's difficult for me to pinpoint a specific song, but if I had to choose, it'd be the 4 shrine themes.
Here's a more general question for you all. Are there any non-video game music artists you draw inspiration from?
As I get older, I find myself becoming more of a music boomer with a narrower taste in music. I used to listen to a lot of classic rock and 80s to 90s metal like Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, Iron Maiden, Ozzy Osbourne, and you get the idea. but these days I mostly just draw from a small pool of VGM artists I really like. Oddly enough, I feel like the 90s to early 2000s R&B and pop kind of sounds like JRPG event music anyway. Like if you listen to Backstreet Boys or NSYNC, they're basically event themes.
I love city pop and J-Fusion, as you know. Tatsuro Yamashita, Junko Hashi, T-Square, Yuji Ono, Himiko Kikuchi, and many more are a great source of inspiration for me. And of course I also love anime music and power metal from time to time. Overall, I'm pretty stuck in the past, like Arvin, and I mostly listen to music from the 20th century. But yeah, all of these are things I like to incorporate in my music.
Honestly, I love everything. When it comes to J-Fusion, Cassiopeia is a beast, both the band and their album, by the same title. When it comes to soundtrack works, I'm a big fan of Joe Hisaishi, Ryuichi Sakamoto, and Yoko Kanno's scores. I also take a lot from classical sources, especially Impressionist and Expressionist composers like Debussy and Ravel.
Any genres you'd like to try making at some stage?
I should probably improve at writing more emotional solo instrumental pieces, but really all I want to do right now is write some 2000 style KMO music. Shoutouts to Dinny.
I'd like to write more songs inspired by Latin jazz.
I'm not sure how to accurately describe it as a genre, but I like to experiment with music like our friends in Zoomlight, Kim Horatio and Cryptovolans.
Do you have any extra behind-the-scenes anecdotes that you'd like to share with everyone?
To be honest, I wrote most of my songs before the other two had even started. I began working on SHIJIN back in November 2021, before Michi was even released, and the last song I wrote was Ascend to Vermilion Nest, which I finished back in January 2023. I had obviously improved drastically between November 2021 and September 2024, so a lot of my songs underwent several revisions. Like most of the original versions didn't even have solos.
So you know how John Eclipse is credited as the composer for all the tracks on streaming websites, right? Well, that was my doing. I had to submit the album to them ahead of release, but I was afraid some of them could spoil the credits, which would have been a massive issue for the guessing game, obviously. So I credited all the songs to John Eclipse in the meantime, but I later realized that I can't change it. So there you go, John Eclipse is real.
Points of inspiration for all of us were different for the album, which gave it a unique sound in the end. I am often inspired by what I play when I'm writing, so Crosscodes OST by Deniz Akbulut informed my writing for the Arctic Leviathan's Hollow. And of course, my love for grooming can be heard in Arboreal Ardor.
Thank you, John Eclipse. Now, to get a bit more in depth, let's talk about each track individually. I'll mention each track in order, and if I could ask each composer and arranger to comment on their respective tracks, that would be lovely. So, any word on SHIJIN, the title track?
SHIJIN's pretty obviously inspired by Spiral of Erebos, without just straight up being a ripoff. I'm glad to never have to open this project file again. I think I've revised it probably close to 20 times.
Voided Basilica.
I've arranged rock before, but this is the first original composition that I wrote in this style. I had a lot of fun with this one. It was amusing watching the live stream, knowing that no one else would guess that I wrote it. Except for you, MB.
Arranging this track felt pretty natural. I went all out to ensure crisp production that would enhance Phil's composition, and both he and I are happy with the result.
Bloodthirst.
Bloodthirst is another one that needed a lot of revisions. I intentionally made the chorus sound like Perennial Flame as a little Easter egg to annoy Philip.
Quiet Reserve.
This is the second track I composed for the album back in 2022. I had to remix it in 2024 so it would sound good next to all the other tracks. It's pretty low-key, but it contributes to the atmosphere of the album pretty well and was a good way to end the prologue.
The Land of Guardians.
This is the third track I composed for the album. I started it during my music burnout in 2023. The composing part was quite easy, but I kept going back to the mix because I wasn't happy with it. I was stuck on it for months, and it only clicked when I arranged Voided Basilica a few months later. Also, it's during the making of this track that I learned to program my newly bought Chinese VSTs. So, if you're asking me which song was the most challenging to make, for me The Land of Guardians was, without a doubt.
A Once Forsaken Dwelling.
Oh, is it me again? This is the fifth track I composed for the album. I had a blast composing it, honestly, and I'm really happy with the result. It's a spiritual sequel to Noctid Your Life of a Market Town from Michi. It's a village theme with a day-night cycle. These kinds of tracks are among my favorites to make. It's a really fun concept, and I intend to keep doing that in the future.
Arboreal Ardor.
Arboreal Ardor features an irregular time signature in the intro section and once again later in the piece with the marimba ostinato. While the rest of the piece is in 4/4, those sections are in 11/16. The chorus is very inspired by Ishibashi and Murayama's work on Gurumin. I try to capture the playful nature of their funky bass lines, among other parts, in this one.
Secrets of the Underground Waterway.
I'm actually really happy with how this one turned out. I think I changed very little between 2022 and 2024, maybe just a little bit of extra flute articulations. I struggle a lot trying to figure out a chorus, so we did a group composing session over Discord and brainstormed ideas for our respective tracks. I think Philip was working on Arctic Leviathan at the time and was similarly struggling. I'm pretty sure my project file has like 9 different iterations for a chorus. I also originally gave this song a French title to throw people off during the guessing game, but I decided that I didn't want to validate the French.
Dissidents.
This is the 4th track I composed for the album. I finished it just before starting to arrange Voided Basilica. It was quite challenging to make, but nowhere near as bad as The Land of Guardians. Initially, I wasn't very happy with the final output for this track, so what you're hearing now, but I like it a lot more now. I'm actually proud of the way I programmed the Chinese flutes in the chorus. So yeah, no regrets.
Argent Wastes.
I wrote this piece for the album back in 2022. The melody was originally going to be played by a shakuhachi, but when Aoki bought the Dongjiao VST, I thought it brought the perfect sound to it. I wanted to create a desert village that didn't lean into the usual musical stereotypes that are often associated with them in game music. A good inspiration for me was the prestigious mask from Nier.
Dunes of Sorrow.
Surprise! Is Jin to leg 6? I originally wrote this back in May 2022 and stopped at the 135 mark. Once I realized how long everyone else's tracks were planned to be, I went back and extended it a lot. This one turned out pretty well in terms of instrumentation because I use it as a template for all of my metal songs moving forward.
Event Horizon.
Okay, this one is very different from the rest of the album. It originally was an orchestral battle preparation type theme, but I wasn't satisfied with the direction it was going in. I restarted and went a completely different way, and I think it worked out really well thematically. There's something magical about the tracks after this point. All the shrines, Shijin Presentiment, and especially Rhapsody of the Orem-Keem have this kind of soundscape to them.
Aberration, the track I misspelt for VGMDB.
Skill issue. Aberration is the very first track I composed for SHIJIN back in 2022. To put things in perspective, I composed it right after Lightning Fast from Electric Square. Just like White Reserve, I had to remix it in 2024 for it to live up to the rest of the tracks in the album. It was a fun track to make, it has lots of movement, the chorus is very catchy, it never stops evolving, and there's a bit of sound design in the track. See if you can find it.
Ascend the Vermilion Nest.
I decided to take a different approach with Fire for this one. The obvious choices were to either do some kind of 3/4 time metal song or something slower paced with hand percussion. Instead, I made it electronic with ethnic elements like the Santur and Koto. If you have good ears, you can tell I had Koguchi brainworms at the time since I make use of his minor 4 into major 5 resolution that he likes to often use.
The Arctic Leviathan's Hollow.
My personal favorite of my tracks was this piece. Genbu, often associated with winter and ice, became the keeper of the water shrine. I wanted to create a soundscape full of complex parts that, when put together, sounded simple and beautiful. I think I achieved that pretty well here. I actually went back and changed the truth motif variation in this one after I wrote Origin, so that wouldn't be the same. Each of the shrines have their own variation of the motif.
Fangs Sunken in Stone.
I was intrigued by the idea of each composer writing a dungeon theme using the same motif. I tried to create something quiet and solemn sounding to fit Byakko.
Greetings from the Wind Celestial.
This is the 6th track I composed for the album. It's the theme of Siryu, Guardian of the East, associated with the wind element. I spent months thinking about that one frequently before actually sitting down to compose it. I'm very proud of it because I managed to make it sound exactly like it was sounding in my head all along, and few things make me feel as proud as this as a composer.
Shijin Presentiment.
I've written a few ethereal title themes in the past couple of years, like for Sacred Earth Alternative and Forbidden Paradise, but this one actually predates all of them. With just a few months until release, I asked Aoki to program his Chinese instruments to help drive the Eastern theme between the shrines and Origin.
Origin.
This piece all started with a motif well before much of the album had been written. As I eventually started adapting the motif for this piece, I played a piano riff, the one that you can hear when the action gets going, and I decided that I wanted the Guardian's boss theme to be both majestic and dangerous, but with a hint of playfulness. I really like the ending to this one. I took all the shrine themes and adapted their variations of the motif into the final chorus, using the original instruments from each composer to do so.
Mystic Ruins.
At the time of the request, I hadn't written a faster tempo song in a long time, so I struggled a lot at first. I was asked to write a penultimate dungeon theme, so it naturally ended up having a nostalgic feel because of that song, in quotations. I composed Mystic Ruins with that song in mind, trying to improve on the parts that I felt were immature or underdeveloped.
Rhapsody of the Aurum King.
This is the 7th and final track I composed for the album. To me personally, it speaks of loneliness, longing, and hope, but you may perceive it differently. In any case, composing this track felt very natural to me. I am very fondly attached to it. So, Rhapsody of the Aurum King is unquestionably my favorite of mine in SHIJIN.
Naturae Finis Ludus.
Naturae Finis Ludus was something I named very early on, well before I started working on the piece. I've been creating a Dungeons & Dragons campaign by the same title at that time, and I liked it so much that I wanted to use it here as well. There's a double meaning there. Naturae Finis Ludus translates to nature's endgame and the end of nature, but the term comes from lusus naturae, which colloquially means freak of nature. These two meanings combined make Naturae Finis Ludus what it is. Fun fact, I wrote this in 3 or 4 days. It was the end of July and I was about to move, and I was determined to finish this before I was too busy to work on it any longer. I locked in.
Philip sure decided to wait until the literal last second to write this one, but fortunately it was easy enough to program for the most part. I handled the bass, drums, guitar, and synth leads. I took a lot of creative liberties for the rhythmic elements, especially the bass slides and drum fills. As far as the composition goes, it remains largely untouched with the exception of the synth solo I wrote during the second SHIJIN chorus around the 6:45 mark. I'm grateful to have been a part of this song.
SHIJIN Finale.
I'm not one to write long songs, so I was happy that I was able to stretch this one out to 4 minutes without any filler or repetition. I had planned the motif usage from the start, so it was kind of funny when I had to stop halfway through it because the truth motif hadn't even been written by Philip yet. I was especially happy with how the legend motif overlapped to the truth chords at the end and how triumphant I made it sound.
Please don't ask me to pronounce Latin again, but it's been an honor being your interviewer today. Thank you so much for taking the time to answer all of these questions.
Thank you, MB, for accepting to be our interviewer.
Thanks for joining, everyone. Take care.